out of the most senior Iranian nuclear scientists, the Israelis have taken out almost all of them. The United States now, for the first time in its history, has to deter two major nuclear powers, not just one in the Russian Federation, but the Chinese Communist Party as well. Those B-2 stealth bombers that the United States flew from the American homeland all the way to Iran, that's not even our newest stuff. That B-2 bomber is decades old, and it's going to be replaced by the B-21, which is even stealthier. And the Chinese, they are very afraid of American stealth bombers. Everything that Australia does must be to convince the Chinese Communist Party that it would be a mistake to act aggressively. For Australia to be refusing at this point to really get on a war footing is, it's madness.
I count Rebeccah Heinrichs, my guest today, from Washington, as a good friend. She is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. She's the director of its Keystone Defence Initiative, and it's well worth looking up, Keystone Defence Initiative at the Hudson Institute. It's very interesting reading, gives you a real feel for what's happening in geopolitical terms around the world today. She specialises in United States national defence policy with a focus on strategic deterrence. She's also an adjunct professor at the Institute of World Politics, where she teaches nuclear deterrence theory. Rebeccah, welcome. Can we kick off by giving us a bit of an overview, if you could, of the significance of that 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran and the reality that the world now looks quite different?
Wonderful. Well, thank you. It's good to be here. I think that this has been President Trump's decision to initiate the military strikes against Iran's nuclear facility. But I think we are really just beginning to unpack the geopolitical consequences of it. You have the very practical military effects, and then you have the strategic effects against the Iranians. But then you also have an impact versus the Chinese and the Russians as well. And so I am very heartened. I think that it was a pushback against the isolationist pressure against President Trump coming from one particular very online wing of the MAGA coalition. And I think he really asserted American leadership, not just in the Middle East, but broadly. And we can talk about all of those various ways. I mean, this really was the United States for the United States to actually launch that very precise, limited strike against the Iranian nuclear facilities. I mean, we had refueling tankers forward deployed in Europe. We had B-2 bombers engaged in this deception campaign all the way in the Indo-Pacific in Guam. And then President Trump, launched these B-2 bombers from the American homeland in Missouri and launched them all the way into Iranian airspace. And then they came safely back before the world even knew it happened. And so just incredible, amazing demonstration of American stealth and prowess and President Trump's own participation in the deception campaign. I mean, it was really remarkable.
Well, it was indeed. And I was really struck that at the end of it, the president was in a powerful enough position to insist on a ceasefire. You then saw Iran launch some more missiles. Israel basically launched a very powerful retaliatory strike, and the president exploded and used some pretty blunt language. They've been fighting for each other for so long, they don't know what the F they're doing. And Israel backed off. It says something very powerful about the way in which global leadership has changed, I would have thought. And it also says something, if I might put it this way, about President Trump. That was a position of almost moral equivalence. He was saying, you're both behaving like fools, when obviously, he's just supported Israel through thick and thin. How do How do you see that rebalancing that's taken place so quickly? And what does it mean more broadly? Let's unpack the rebalancing, if you could, as you see it.
Sure. Well, I think, as you say, John, I mean, clearly President Trump has very clearly put the United States squarely in the corner of the Israelis. So the United States supports Israel's military campaign to destroy Hamas in Gaza. It has supported Israel, to taking out the other Iranian jihadist proxies throughout the region. The United States has directly participated in taking out Iranian proxies, the Houthis that were, closing off the Red Sea, that major waterway there. And then even in that one, President Trump said, okay, we're done. Once he kind of pummeled the Houthis and the Houthis kind of backed off, he said, we're done doing this. So President Trump is demonstrating that he has clear military objectives, and then he wants it to stop. He wants the war fighting to stop. He doesn't want it to go on forever. He doesn't want it to be prolonged. So as you point out, once the United States executed its own military objectives against the illicit Iranian nuclear program, these 3 facilities, then the U.S. objectives were done. Clearly, it had collaborated with the Israelis. I mean, the Israelis did the bulk of the work. 90% of the work, they cleared the air space. So the United States just had an open, just totally vulnerable Iran. I mean, the Iranians didn't even see these stealth bombers, didn't even strike back, didn't even shoot back while the U.S. was in their airspace. But then when President Trump said, I want a ceasefire, as you said, the Iranians and the Israelis basically looked at the clock and said, okay, the ceasefire starts at 5. We're going to just unload before 5. And it made President Trump really mad, because even though they didn't violate the technical letter of the law of the ceasefire, he thought it was in bad faith, because he really just said, enough, I want it to be done. The Israelis have completely decimated the Iranian military. The United States carried out our own military objectives. And to your point, it's not so much a moral equivalence between the two as much as it's just President Trump is not constrained by the same kinds of things American politicians have been in the past, where they're afraid to say something that maybe seems like it's going against, Israel. It's trying to keep the support. Obviously, there's strong American population, very supportive of the nation of Israel. I mean, but what do you say? I mean, who's going to say that President Trump's not clearly in support of Israel? I mean, he just, for the first time, I mean, I'm excited about it, John, because I have been frustrated that every American president has been trying to compel the Iranians to back off of their illicit nuclear program. And it was finally President Trump who said, there's no enrichment, no domestic enrichment. You may not have a nuclear weapon. And then his patience ran out. And so we took decisive action and took out that facility. Incredible decisive American military power. And then he said, we're done. And he didn't feel any kind of pressure to continue to support Israel in their strikes against Iran, when he said the Iranians have lost and this is over. Really, truly remarkable diplomatic leverage that President Trump had, and then was willing to use it in a way that was effective. And so here we are. We're in a ceasefire for now. And then until the Israelis, I think, see it as in their core national interest to begin. If the Iranians break the ceasefire, et cetera, this is where we are with the leadership of the United States.
Well, so many things fall out of it to pursue. The first is, more generally, I suppose, is the Middle East now a safer place, and there's the world a safer place? But come to a couple of things that you've just raised. The awesome capacity of the IDF, their air force. A lot of it's American technology. It's their courage, the innovation and the cleverness with which they've degraded their enemies, with everything from exploding pages. Took 3 years to set them up, to advertise them, to get them into the system, and then they let them go. We've seen laser-like removal of key players, scientists, leaders, military personnel. And then we've seen, as you've just said, that extraordinary American technology. Is it your view that we can be confident that the Iranian nuclear capacity, or capacity to build a nuclear weapon, has been seriously degraded, and degraded in a way that allows for a proper reset in the Middle East?
So that is my assessment. and I come to that conclusion by taking a look at what sort of all of the various intelligence agencies are saying. So from the CIA to that Defense Intelligence Agency initial damage assessment that was leaked to an American television network that kind of said, look, the United States didn't successfully totally degrade the enrichment activity going on in Fordow. That Fordow is essentially the heartbeat of the Iranian illicit nuclear program. It's where the enrichment was going on. It's in that deeply buried, hardened target in that mountain. I mean, essentially, the Iranians know from the various times that the Israelis have taken out illicit nuclear reactors in other places over the last couple of decades that in order to try to protect their program, they dispersed it and then buried it, trying to make it really hard to get to. But if you listen to what the IAEA, which is that International Inspections Agency that keeps track of nuclear programs, and the IDF, the Israeli military, and the American various intelligence agencies, we have dramatically set back the Iranian nuclear program. Do we have complete confidence that all of these centrifuges, the enriched uranium is totally destroyed? No, there's no way to know that unless you actually have physical people physically down on the ground who can inspect that. But the industrial work that they were doing, the weaponization, the spinning the centrifuges in these facilities, Esfahan, Natanz, and Fordow, these are incredibly formidable facilities that the Iranians built so that they could produce a nuclear weapon, and they have been significantly destroyed. Not only that, but you have out of the most senior Iranian nuclear scientists, the Israelis have taken out almost all of them. There's still a few remaining, so there's going to be some people who know how to do this. But when you think of their A team that really knew how to produce a nuclear weapon and weaponize it, I mean, they're dead. And then you have the launchers that have been destroyed. And so, I mean, if Iran could have fought back more effectively, they would have, and they didn't. And so I think that this is a very successful. I think that the Middle East is safer, not just because of the direct military action, but goodness, I mean, you look at the Gulf partners. The Gulf partners have to say, "Oh, look, the United States is going to fight back. The United States is a very strong, dominant, formidable military power with the political will to take military action. We better side with it, partner with it." I mean, there's now credible rumors that maybe you have the Saudis who want to participate in the Abraham Accords and continue to improve their relations with the Israelis, because you don't have you don't have the Iranians as a very serious, formidable enemy of the Gulf partners, the Emiratis and the Saudis, spreading their jihadism and destabilizing the Middle East. I mean, they've been totally knocked off their pedestal, and it's going to take them some time to rebuild. And so in that regard, I do think that the Middle East, you don't want to sort of, be too overly optimistic to be disappointed in the effects here, because the Iranians are going to continue to be a problem for the United States, but significantly weakened country. And I think really the United States and the Israelis' action sends a strong message that we're going to rebalance the Middle East in favor of the Israelis and these Gulf partners that are more secular and want to have constructive relationships with the West.
Clearly, it's established Israel as just 9 million people or so as the lead military power in the region as well. That in itself must have quite a crystallizing effect on a lot of thinking in the Middle East.
I think so. And my goodness, I mean, and what a compelling demonstration of the worth of that ally for the United States. I mean, we have been collaborating so closely with the Israelis on technology, on military development, and then to see that ally who the United States has invested in so much just carry out such a successful military campaign, espionage activity. John, the Israelis were able to essentially they did what the Ukrainians did very similar operation to what the Ukrainians did against the Russians, which is they have been secretly building a drone operation inside enemy territory, inside Iran, that they were able to launch those drones to take out some of the launchers once this military campaign was underway, which is what something similar we saw with the Ukrainians with these drones that were inside Russia and then launched and then took out these Russian bombers. And so incredible deception. I mean, just very effective use of asymmetric capabilities to take out some of the more serious and formidable challenges, military challenges inside Iran. And so, President Trump, he's made the point in various ways that weak allies are a liability for the United States, but strong allies are a great value add for the United States. And Israel has clearly demonstrated that it is a strong and capable ally.
It does seem to me that it's unlikely the Iranians will roll out the red carpet for inspectors in the future. There are those who say this will simply make them more determined than ever, despite the limitations that you've referred to that they now face, loss of personnel and scientists and so forth. They'll be more determined, despite that, than ever to rebuild their nuclear capacity. I think that's the only way they can themselves be safe. On the other hand, I guess the question is, can the Israelis and the Americans between them monitor what's happening closely enough to be able to detect any attempt to rebuild a nuclear capacity or get themselves back in the queue for a nuclear weapon?
You raise a great point. I always find it so curious. The critics of the United States' decision to use military force, the ones that said that we need to have an Iran deal like the Obama-Iran deal that President Trump withdrew from during his first term, one of their arguments is, look, the Iranians are cooperating, and so this is the best we can do. And people like me said, okay, but the Iranians have not made a strategic decision to put down their arms and go for a peaceful path in the Middle East. So why would we trust them at all that they would not have a secretive, nuclear capability that they have not disclosed? And there's no reason for me to trust them. And so then those same people are now saying, look, you destroyed their facilities. Now the Iranians are going to have a secret nuclear program that they're going to keep from us, which was my point all along, that is what we should assume they were doing anyway. So I find that argument it's not very compelling to me that the United States taking decisive military force against its robust and illicit nuclear weapons program, that therefore will be the thing that pushes the Iranians. I mean, the Iranians were doing under enormous international pressure and sanctions, still willing to take an enormous amount of pain so they could continue their program. So I to your question about how effective the United States and the Israelis can be at monitoring, I mean, right now the airspace is cleared. And so any kind of overhead surveillance, I think, should be even easier and more effective to see what the Iranians are up to. I would fully anticipate and even urge, although they don't need my urging, the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, I'm sure is going to be very active inside Iran, keeping track of what the remaining nuclear scientists are doing and heads of their military and political leadership are doing.
Well, Israel's shown an extraordinary determination, and it's done so in the face of great hostility from many other parts of the world, including, I'm ashamed to say, Australia, where we've not been as strong an ally in recent years as we have been traditionally of Israel. In fact, the constant calls for de-escalation and diplomacy and so forth, in my view, have been quite unrealistic. But the reality, surely, is that the dynamics have changed greatly, and that must have implications for what's happening in Gaza, Rebeccah. How do you see that playing out now, that horrible, horrible scenes we see on our television all the time, and so often It's not contextualized, of course, by pointing out that Hamas are responsible for this mess. So you've got Iran's proxies, you've got Hezbollah, you've got the Houthis, and of course Hamas. Presumably they've lost a lot of support now from their sponsors in Iran. Presumably Hamas is massively weakened in Gaza, though at terrible cost. What do you think will happen now in Gaza?
Well, Iran, of course, is the head of the octopus of all of these various jihadist proxies, including Hamas. And so, because of the incredible success of the Israeli campaign against the Iranian military and nuclear program and the United States' strikes, I mean, Iran is just, not only is it incredibly degraded and weakened, it now has to focus on rebuilding its own military and facilities. And so it is not in as strong as a place as it was before to continue providing direct support or even geopolitical support and cover to Hamas. So Hamas is incredibly weakened. And as you point out, President Trump is in a position right now to have a stronger hand in the direction of the Israelis as well. I have been very supportive of Israel's goals, which have been in Gaza, which have been the destruction of Hamas, the retrieving of their living and deceased innocent hostages that Hamas still has inside Gaza, and then also the destroying Hamas's ability to govern again, to reconstitute, and to conduct another horrific October 7th attack again. I mean, the Israelis will never let that happen again to the best of their ability. And so I think that we are closer to a conclusion of Israel's defensive military actions against Hamas. But again, when a war is over, when the losing side quits. Hamas is the losing side. They have to quit. They have to leave that area or be destroyed. And no longer will Hamas control Gaza, so close there to present another threat to the Israeli people again. So I think that we're closer to the end of that war than we were certainly before Israel's successful military campaign with the help of the United States against the Iranian military.
What does that mean for the much touted idea of a two-state solution? I don't know why people thought that was so realistic when Iran was making it very plain that they were totally and utterly opposed to a two-state solution. But now with a degraded Iran, is there some hope of a two-state solution, or is it still something that's quite naive?
It is my view that the world changed after October 7th, and the idea of a two-state solution, I think, is impossible. If there are plenty of other places for the Palestinian people to live and to flourish in their societies outside of that particular region. I mean, all of these predominantly Muslim Arab nations can take the Palestinian people who want to live and have a life of peace. But the Israelis have been extremely patient, very restrained for many, many years. And the fact remains that, Egypt was supposed to ensure that Philadelphia corridor, that passageway there between it and Gaza would not be able to have terrorist activity, and that they couldn't be armed through the Philadelphia corridor to launch attacks against Israel. Egypt failed. Egypt failed in doing what it was supposed to do. The Jordanians have failed in their particular efforts to ensure that the terrorism stays away from the Israelis. I mean, you think about Lebanon, the same thing there. And so I think that Israel is to a place now where their perspective is, if we're going to have peace, that these people who have been living in Gaza have to go, who have been living in Palestine have to go into one of these other predominantly Arab Muslim countries and be governed there. So again, I think that some of our friends in Western open democracies have not quite caught up and grappled with the effect of October 7th and how it truly changed the dynamics in that region.
It does strike me that a lot of people in the West, frankly, have lost their moral compass. To accuse Israel of engaging in genocide, whilst you ignore the reality that Hamas had written into its charter the obliteration of the Jewish people, their sponsors, Iran, have written into their national charter the obliteration of Israel. Mind you, I understand that one of their very senior clerics observed that, oh no, we're quite happy for the Jewish people to live there, but it will be under a Gazan state. Now, we know what that means. In radical Islam, that means you live very much under dimitude as a second-rate citizen. But this confusion of language reflecting an underlying loss of moral compass in the West reflects, again, I think, the utter inability in our lazy secularism to grapple with and understand the very nature of radical Islam and very powerful religious beliefs. So we're starting behind the eight ball. At the very least, we're confronted with great conviction when we lack conviction in so much of the West today. But at the worst, we've lost our moral compass and our ability to understand the difference between real good and real evil.
I couldn't agree more, John. I mean, really, the way I see the Israelis are they are the front end of this fight in the West against barbarism, against this radical ideology that is against all of the principles and values that we hold dear of pluralism and of democracy and of the dignity of the human person. I mean, that is a profound Judeo-Christian principle. And it's, it really is the animating principle of the United States and the founding of the United States. That's another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is this anti-Semitism that has been growing on the American political right, at least among a particular wing of podcasters or, so-called influencers. And they've tried to argue that the American politicians should care less about the nation of Israel and turn and focus on the American people. And what they fail to grasp is deep in the American DNA is these foundational principles with the Jewish people, from the Old Testament and the scriptures to the New Testament, this profound reality that human beings are full of dignity because we are created in the image of God. And this really is, I think, foundational to the West. And so, the jihadists are opposed to the Jewish people. This is not just about, two sides that have equal measure complaints about the other or fighting over just a piece of territory. They're two civilizational opponents. One, the West, Israel, and the other, I think, authoritarianism, illiberal jihadism that would seek to destroy not just Israel, but the United States. I mean, when you think about, you got to remember, to the jihadist, the Islamist radical, Israel is the little Satan. The United States is the great Satan. And so, we must begin with the moral clarity about whose side is right. And then you can make sense then of what needs to happen sort of geopolitically. And so, again, I think we're in a much safer place. I'm very optimistic about the turn of things geopolitically. I hope we can talk about the effects that this will have also in other corners. I mean, with the Russians and the Chinese, because I think what Israel has done for us is really wake up the Republican Party and really kind of energize what I think is some those who have had the moral clarity, I think, are on the ascendancy within the Republican Party now, after President Trump directed these strikes. And so I am hopeful that things will get better for other issues like Ukraine and NATO, and then also peace in the Indo-Pacific theater as well.
Well, that's encouraging to an Australian who's watched with some concern the conservative end of the Republican Party insisting that MAGA, Make America Great Again, means isolationism, withdrawing. America can afford to do so because it's such a big and powerful and well-resourced nation. I think there was a concern for some time that perhaps President Trump fell into that category himself. But this is evidenced that he recognises the imperatives for America as much as anything else, I would have thought, that there be some sort of global order and a commitment to its maintenance.
Yes. I mean, I think that President Trump in this second Trump administration has tried to bring in individuals for this coalition of MAGA that President Trump has perceived helped him get reelection. And some of the individuals or some of the sort of people on the outside, let's just think Tucker Carlson and the former Fox News commentator who now has a podcast. And then there's others, the parade of individuals who he has hosted on his podcast. Really, I have called them the 1939 Project, which is reminds you of the left's 1619 Project, which is to subvert the American founding of 1776 to make it, instead to draw us attention to the slave trade and slavery and its effect on the United States. And that's the identity politics, et cetera. And what's going on the right with these podcasters is trying to, one, cast doubt among the American people that we are the people who have the moral high ground. That, Tucker Carlson had these individuals on his podcast, this one who's not even a historian, but Tucker called him an historian. He tried to argue that Winston Churchill was the real villain of World War II and that Hitler actually wanted peace and the Jewish people were a problem. And the Jewish people today continue to be a problem. I mean, this is just open, just abhorrent anti-Semitism that really reminds us of the original America First movement, that during the years leading up to the World Wars. And so the concern that I have had is that, oh my goodness, maybe these voices are going to impact this new Trump administration. But goodness, President Trump's decision to support Israel's military activity and then to launch an offensive military strike totally burst the myth that the United States was simply going to turn its back on our allies, turn our back on the Jewish state, turn our back on our global duties and responsibilities as the preeminent military power with the moral high ground, as the free and open society who helped liberate Europe in the World War, and by the way, who used the atomic bombs to end that terrible war, and who have now used our nuclear weapons to deter major power war to maintain the peace. And I think we can now say that President Trump ignored those people, or he stiff-armed them, those who would say the United States should turn inward and forget our global responsibilities. And so he is not of their mind, but I think I still have a little bit of a concern that they can be influential, but certainly this week, the last couple of weeks, they have been very diminished in their influence. And I think those individuals who were urging President Trump to take military action and to defend Israel, their stock as advisors has gone way up. And I would just encourage Australians too, and NATO allies in Europe. There is no Republican faction that is good on Ukraine and wants to defend Ukraine and strengthen NATO who is not also defensive of Israel. There is no, so if you want a United States that understands that we have global responsibilities to stop the Russians and deter further Russian aggression and to strengthen NATO, those Republicans, those Reagan Republicans, they're also very defensive of Israel. And so my hope, and I've gotten some early indicators that President Trump is going to ride this momentum. The military strikes that he directed are wildly popular among his voting base. Wildly popular. It does seem like these individuals who didn't want the United States to do it really mostly lived online. And we're not a manifestation of the views of the American people more broadly. And so I'm hopeful that President Trump will now listen to those other individuals, senators like Senator Cotton, Senator Risch, Senator Wicker, and Speaker Johnson, and others who understand that the United States has global responsibilities and duties, and that the American people are safer, more secure, and freer when we take those duties very seriously.
Rebecca, one thing that does concern me about nearly every country in the West, and particularly America because of its importance to global stability, is America's economic situation. It's a very dynamic economy. It looks set to grow rapidly again, but it's worth keeping in mind the Ferguson law. Sir Neil Ferguson has observed that down through history, we learn that when a great power's debt reaches the point where the interest costs more than it can spend on defence, it doesn't remain a great power for long. How do you see, I mean, plainly tariffs were meant to bring a lot of money into the United States. You'd have to say it's been a little lumpy so far and rather disconcerting for those of us in the rest of the world. And it doesn't look like it's going to produce the revenues that might have been anticipated. You've got that great big beautiful bill going through with big tax cuts that Elon Musk is warning will add massively to an already out of control deficit. How do you see the President and the Congress and the Senate coming together to try and better manage America's economy going forward? I say that as a great respecter of America, but one who can't help being concerned by that massive debt. I'm told that one economist calculated that to pay it down would cost every American wage earner their entire pay packet for 3 years.
Well, it's a major concern of mine. I have 5 children who I would love to know that they're growing up in the next American century, in which the United States remains the dominant military and economic power, and not the Chinese Communist Party, because the strongest power economically and militarily is the power that will influence global events towards its benefit and the benefit of its allies and partners. And so I'm not an economist, but my hope is President Trump is an outcome-oriented person. And so when things don't go well, he's perfectly willing to try things that other politicians wouldn't even try. And he's willing to try things. And when they don't work out well, and when they don't bear the good fruit that he wants, he stops. And so I think that I'm not sort of ideologically opposed to the idea of tariffs, but my view is that our tariffs should be designed to increase trade and partnership between and among Western allies, and that we should be reshoring and getting critical supplies that are directly related to the American military, pharmaceuticals, things to the American way of life, out of China and into any other country that is safer than China, which is basically every other country. And to me, it's a misfire to put tariffs on a country like Vietnam, which is not a democracy, not an ally, really, but it is a partner of the United States, and it certainly prefers a world in which the United States is a dominant power and not the Chinese. And so And then, of course, with the EU, with our dear allies, the Australians, the Japanese, the South Koreans, I would be looking for ways to take advantage of one another's benefits and in their own economies and their own supply chains, so that we can, use our collective strength, collective wealth, and ingenuity as open societies.
Well, Rebecca, the last few weeks have, I think, galvanized global thinking in very different ways to what we might have expected quite recently. We've seen the Europeans change their attitude towards President Trump, and in particular, do something which is amazing, really step up on defence spending, as he's been insisting and as they've been resisting for so long. This is really quite extraordinary.
Not only is it extraordinary, but I do think that President Trump also is completely convinced at this point in the salience and the usefulness of the NATO alliance. President Trump made a remarkable comment at the Hague summit where he said that NATO's commitments now to get to 5% of GDP for each country to spend on defense, with the exception of one country, Spain, but every other country has committed to spending real money on real hardware, military equipment, and personnel. President Trump said this is a great achievement for the West. And so, there's been some question about whether or not the United States believes that the post-World War II international order, which is really most concretely its system of alliances and the duties and the collaboration it has to them and with them, are still meaningful and useful today. And I think that the resounding answer is yes, yes. And so it is remarkable, very, very different change from the German government, which now the Germans are going to be, very seriously spending on defense and making sure that the Baltic countries are safe and secure. The Poles are going to collaborate with the Baltic countries and the Nordic countries. They're looking at arrangements to provide Baltic Sea security. And so it's remarkable. And then President Trump also made a really important comment where he said, even as our European allies are going to take on more of the conventional deterrent duty, that the United States is going to stay there until they're ready, until they're not. In other words, we're not going to leave ever entirely, but we're not even going to leave so fast that we leave the Europeans exposed, which could tempt further Russian aggression beyond Ukraine. And so that's remarkable. It's a remarkable change. And I think it just reflects, as you said, John, these European capitals understand President Trump better and understand that they do have to commit more to defense. It's not even just about what's fair. It's because the United States now, for the first time in its history, has to deter two major nuclear powers, not just one in the Russian Federation, but the Chinese Communist Party as well. And so we need the collective support and efforts of our allies in order to carry the burden.
So plainly, this really must be concentrating minds in Moscow and Beijing. President Xi plainly also believes that, or did believe until recently, that China's hour has arrived, that they can become the dominant economic and global power, which really ought to shake us out of our complacency. Just this morning, I've been reading about what life in Hong Kong is now like. It has gone from being a glittering, exciting, dynamic place to one where people live in fear and trepidation, and the soul's gone out of the place. That's what would await us, I think. That's the reality. People need to be realistic. If the Chinese are allowed, or let me rephrase that, the Chinese Communist Party, very important distinction, is allowed to have its way. We've got to remember, after all, the Hong Kongese people are Chinese. They love freedom as much as any of us do. The problem is not the Chinese people, it's Beijing. But how would they be reading this? What would be happening in Moscow and in Beijing, in your view, at the moment?
Well, it's important to remember that when you are seeking to deter an adversary from taking an aggressive action against you or your allies, your interests, that you have to convince him both that you have the capability to stop him and the political will. And I think that with the two events, with the United States' demonstration of incredible military capability with our B-2 stealth bombers, which, by the way, those B-2 stealth bombers that the United States flew from the American homeland all the way to Iran without being seen, that's not even our newest stuff. That bomber, that B-2 bomber, is decades old, and it's going to be replaced by the B-21, which is even stealthier. And the Chinese, if you look at academic research within the Chinese Communist Party, they are very afraid of American stealth bombers. And so I think that has an enormous effect. But then also we, the United States, demonstrated that we still have the political will to use that incredible military strength in pursuit of our interests. And then the other event, of course, was the NATO summit, where President Trump applauded our NATO allies and commended it as a more lethal, stronger alliance that is good for the West. Those two events, I think, have to concern the Chinese Communist Party and the Russian Federation. They no longer have the Iranian regime as a useful tool to undermine the United States and our Western allies and partners in the Middle East. They don't have the Iranian government to be a strong drone factory to help them in in Russia's war against Ukraine. And so it's been a significant diminished anti-Western bloc in the Middle East. And that's bad for China, it's bad for Russia, and it's good for the United States, Australians, and our European allies, those who would prefer to have, another century dominated by open, liberal, pluralistic societies in the West.
You rightly talk about the importance of allies, and that's militarily what the West needs to be in the face of the enormous emerging reality of great power competition and of instability globally. The arc of autocracy, if you like, one of them now massively weakened, but China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. I speak as an Australian and a proud Australian, but with no little concern that the current government here is insisting that 2% is all we need to spend on defence because we've assessed the situation and that meets the challenge of the moment. We'll increase it to 2.3 in the early part of the next decade. Meanwhile, Elbridge Colby has ordered a review into AUKUS and the possibility of Australia obtaining submarines. And at the same time as all of that is happening, what the Australian people, I think, are vaguely aware of with some increasingly concern, but are not being openly told, is that our defence capability right now is in fact declining, that the government's own reviews have told us that a great deal more is needed, particularly in the area of missile capability and missile defence. And we are really inviting, I would have thought, a very strong response when our Prime Minister and the President of the United States actually finally do meet. President Trump doesn't mince his words. I'm not sure that you would feel that you wanted to comment on it, except I'd be interested in the any observations you did want to make. Australia and America have one far bigger than the other, of course, but we've been allies, particularly since the Pacific War in the 1940s. And I suspect at the moment there's a sense that we're not pulling our weight. Spain has incurred the wrath of the president. It seems to me that we would do better to emphasise to the Americans what we can do rather than what we're not going to do.
Yes, I think that, for Australia to be refusing at this point to really get on a war footing is, it's madness. The safety and the security of Australia is imperative for the United States' goal to keep a free and open Indo-Pacific. Australia remains one of the United States' best military political allies. And we are moving into an incredibly dangerous period where everything that Australia does, South Korea, Japan, everything that those democracies of the West in that region do must be to convince the Chinese Communist Party that it would be a mistake to act aggressively against Taiwan. I mean, talk about a Chinese people. They're ethnically Chinese, but they're a free and open society, and they want to be Taiwanese, and they don't want to be part of the Chinese Communist Party. And I think that we should have solidarity with them because of that, and also because of the geopolitical importance of ensuring that the Chinese Communist Party cannot project power beyond Taiwan and push the United States out, as we are the primary security guarantor of our allies in that region as well. And we provide an extended nuclear deterrent to our allies in that region. And I think that will be completely undermined if we permit China to take Taiwan by force. And so, I mean, the day is here. The time is here for Australia to really get serious, demonstrate that it has the political will to flourish as a nation and society. And the only way that can happen is if it really does invest in its own defense. And I just remind people, it's almost like we've forgotten the COVID pandemic and how China, the Chinese Communist Party, abused and mistreated the Australian people and the Australian government, because the Australian government had the audacity to demand that responsible nations pursue the origins of the coronavirus and to figure out the origins and where the cause was, and the Chinese communist behavior in basically spreading the virus and not acting as a responsible power. And when Australia spoke up and did that, the Chinese Communist Party imposed, sanctions against Australia and had those 14 points that they wanted the Australians to relent on, most of them having to do with domestic politics inside Australia. I mean, that's a little taste of a world in which the Chinese Communist Party is dominant. The leverage and the coercion that it would have over our sovereignty as free societies should be intolerable to every free person. And that includes Australians. And so it's my hope that as our leaders get together and President Trump has these conversations, that we will find a willing and ally and very, very productive and cooperative ally and partner in the Australian government. That's my hope. And my hope is, over the last week, that clearly I hope the Australian government can see that the United States, I mean, we are a good bet. If you're trying to hedge and to kind of see where China's going and where the United States is going, my goodness, I mean, I would be really doing all it can to collaborate with the United States, and so that is my hope.
Well, it's certainly mine as well, Rebecca. I am the son of a serviceman who all but lost his life, was one of those soldiers literally given up for dead fighting the Nazis in North Africa during the Second World War. And I'm very conscious that this country in the past, as a mid-sized, responsible democracy, has played its part in global affairs. And to the Australians listening, I can only say I sincerely hope that we can find again the self-confidence, the self-belief, the commitment to our own children, if I can put it that way, that our fathers and grandfathers displayed. But Rebecca, thank you so very much for your time, because what you've had to say has been tremendously important, and it's always great to talk to you. I look forward to the next time we have a chance to connect.
It's a great privilege to have this conversation with you, John, and I look forward to the next time as well. Thanks so much.